Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Yoong. I'm Ethan's operating partner. And today, Jamie Lee and I will have a fireside chat and live Q&A on landing the one-page executive summary. And also, how do you get executive buy-in and trust? For background, Jamie is an e-commerce executive who's led brands like Nike, Walmart, EA, Sony, and emerging brands like Vital Proteins and Everlane. Some highlights from Jamie. Jamie was on the founding team that scaled Walmart's online grocery from market one to over 1,000. Jamie was also on Nike's new global apparel e-commerce organization as the digital GM and launched various new product lines. And Jamie was also the VP of digital, leading Vital Proteins, which, Jamie, fun fact, our household is full of Vital Proteins,
Love
especially
to
the
hear it.
collagen.
That
I think
blue
I had
tub.
three. Yeah, the blue tub. I think we have six right now, and I had three scoops this morning.
Amazing.
But leading Vital Proteins e-commerce team and led it to profitable growth and completing a full Nestle acquisition, which is a big congrats there. So to wrap everything up, Jamie is an advisor, speaker, and instructor on Maven, teaching a e-commerce 201 course where she goes deep on marketing, product, GTM, planning and pitching, and ROI. And I love this fact. Her course is rated a 4.9 out of 5. So the alumni love it, and then we'll share more details about that. But Jamie, let's get started. Well, first of all, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jason. It's
Yeah,
fun
it's
to
fun.
connect with you and the community.
Yep. Let's dive right in. I'm gonna
Let's
screen
do it.
share the one pager that you created. Okay, so this is the one page executive summary. I'm gonna hand it off to you. Take us through this one pager.
Yeah. So, Jason, I'll kind of go through the outline of the structure itself and then put it into play of the context that I have here. So, this one-page executive summary, in terms of the what and where, this is really used when you're communicating your big divisional idea, your team's idea to what I call executives. So, in some organizations, that's director and above, and in other organizations, that's VP and above. Essentially, the leaders that have decision-making rights, big organizational prioritizations say, and really hold the purse strings to resource your team's success for the next year, the next quarter. And so the impetus of this one-page summary, I would say that an executive summary like this should have a few key components. So one you'll see very prominently is the vision. So a clear vision really explains the purpose of the initiative and how it benefits the organization, the division, or the industry. And this showcases the context and highlights the significance of your proposal. So for example, I'm going to use a hypothetical apparel company that I've worked for. I've worked for a couple. But here in this vision statement, I'm stating that this apparel company has the opportunity to drive epic growth across the organization. So showcasing again the tie-in to what value does this division provide to the org and the brand. It also empowers the organization to expand globally. So really the brand was really looking to say, how do we expand our footprint across different geographies? So I highlighted how this initiative would help push that through. And then through a focus on a specific category of apparel growth. So really showcasing the how. So again, tying it back to how you're transforming the organization. If we were to take Walmart as an example in the vision statement there, it would be looking at something like, hey, we're building out Walmart online grocery that has the opportunity to transform the industry and how people shop for groceries at large. So really thinking big about where you can take your product and your division. And then the other two key components are objectives and then what I like to call the roadmap and metrics. So if you look at the objectives here, it's really important to showcase a from. So where you're at, what's the state of the union, and the to, so your North Star and how that ladders back up to the vision. And so the from to is really critical. So I'll showcase the example here. The from is the company is currently a market leader, but needs to reclaim its innovation and expand its reach to diverse global individuals through emerging category growth. So really the statement captures, okay, here's where we're at, but there's still an opportunity. So highlighting the problem to solve for the opportunity is important, is an important ingredient in the from section. And then the to, which is the future state, is saying, hey, by focusing on this apparel category, which is really our division, this company can refresh itself as an innovation leader, reach more athletes globally, and drive bigger baskets amongst existing customers. So the to is sort of the North Star that then ladders up to the vision. And then I'll kind of go through this at a high level. And Jason, I'm sure you'll have questions, but then breaking it down to say, now that we have the vision and objectives, what are the goals? So the sub goals that lead up to the objectives. So really the business tactics that you're running, the strategies. So, okay, if we were to put it into a plan, what does this look like? Metrics, really picking just one or two, not going overboard on that. What enablers you need, what has to be true to make it happen, people, process, tools, rapid response work stream. So what are you going to test first once you launch this to validate that this is the right direction? What risks and dependencies? This is really important because I think this is one that gets neglected or forgotten a lot in lieu of just showcasing the upside, but it's really important to stress what risks and dependencies are and also the work to be paused. So what work is already on the roadmap that you might want to pull back on in order for this key priority to come to life. And so that's my long answer to your short question, Jason, but wanted to give a little bit of an overview of the one pager.
I love the I love the clarity of the from and the to, from so current state to future state. I love how it's just one sentence. It's very clear to get through it. For the okay, so for the chart, how many goals usually does this chart have? Is it just one big goal, or are we talking about multiple usually?
Great question. Anywhere from 3 to 4
Three to
goals.
four, got it.
Mhm.
And then for the metrics, you're saying 1 to 2 metrics per goal.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. In this chart, so there's what, 1, 2, 3, 7 columns. What's the hardest column to write?
Let's see. That's a great question. I would actually say the risks and dependencies and work to be paused, mostly because there's the natural momentum of saying, I want to showcase what this initiative can do versus what it can't do. So I think mentally it's harder to write the risks and dependencies. But if we talk about just the challenge of creating something short and succinct and narrowing something down, it would likely be the strategies one because there's usually more than, say, 4 that the team wants to deliver on, but prioritizing and really writing a concise strategy takes the most amount of work. And then mentally, the blockers, aka risks and dependencies and work to be paused, is mentally a little bit tougher to think through.
I was going to comment the risks and dependencies and work to be paused. I like how it's part of this because in a lot of these type of exec summaries, you actually don't see those. They're usually in the appendix or they're asked verbally, et cetera. So I like how you address these up front. For the goals, how do you prioritize which goals to stack rank essentially? Is it just based on executive preference or business impact? What's your thought there?
Yeah, so to keep it simple, we like to pull it against executive prioritization. So typically in a large org, the executive team, C-suite and above, they come across, hey, here are the 3 to 5 big goals as an organization. And typically your division or team can really ladder up to 3 of those really solidly, and maybe 2 of those really solidly. So that becomes really easy to create that goal. And it starts to shape that universal language that you can anchor around when talking to executives as well. To say, hey, we're here to drive profit margin, and this is how we're going to make your goal a reality.
That makes sense. When you've presented this to the exec team, what type of is there a commonly asked question you get a lot, or is there a hotly debated discussion about this pager or a topic on here that you've come across?
Yes, there are many, but I'll highlight 2 to 3 that are most prominent. So I'd say the goals becomes easy if you share metrics with the executive team in the C-suite. The
Mm.
ones that you get a little bit of pushback or questions is around strategies, because typically some executives might be more geared towards what's the big shiny object, or they just have a preference in mind of like, hey, if we're trying to drive profit margin, my favorite thing to do is X, Y, and Z, but it might not be the best thing about the business. So then it becomes a debate. And then the second question that they tend to ask is like, well, how did you come up with the opportunity assessment? So if we say,
Mm.
hey, it's a 20% profit savings year on year, they're going to say, well, how did you come up with the math? And then doing that quickly. So I think knowing your numbers is really important because that's a very common question. And then the enablers piece is a very big question as well, because there tends to be a lot of asks from teams to say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z resources, people, process, tools, technology. So I think there's always that perception that how trim can we get from an enabler standpoint? Can we just invest in one enabler? Do we need 2 or 3? So there becomes a lot of discussion around how many resources do you actually need to get this done?
I was going to ask on enablers, when it comes to headcount requests or
Mhm.
resource or money, do you tend to over-index, under-index, or just try to get it right? What's your thought?
I try to do a good, better, best, actually. So
Oh,
in an
okay.
appendix section, I tend to say like, hey, the best is ideal. The better is kind of that sweet spot of, okay, if we have this is good enough, and good is like, this is the bare minimum that we need to get done. So I give
Hmm.
them a little bit of a range just so they can see that our team is thinking through holistically what's best for the organization, not just, oh, here are the resources that only our team needs.
Yep. Plus one to that. Usually give a menu of options. It could be three short ones and say, this is our recommended one. These are ones we
Mhm.
considered. Because you don't want to get into we presented one metric and then it becomes a battleground discussion. Um,
Exactly.
so this executive one pager, you present this, and then is there anything else? You mentioned appendix. Besides appendix, is there what else is there?
Yeah, so an appendix is so we present a few things. So an appendix that really kind of shows the work that leads up to this. And then the other two components that are helpful is usually another one pager or a two pager of a recent win. So say that we're presenting this in January. I like to share, hey, here's what we did in Q4 of last year. Maybe it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or a big event, and here are some wins or learnings and opportunities just to showcase how we think, how we approach new initiatives. And if there's wins, it's just a good data point to build momentum for your team and build more credibility. And then the other piece I like to add is also a roadmap or plan. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but to say, hey, if we're presenting this in January, here's a quarterly roadmap of the big value drops for these 3 to 4 goals that we're showcasing. And just at a high level, what we're planning to deliver on if we get all the enablers in place by Q1 through Q4. And hey, here's your big number. Because what you won't see here is actually that big, hey, it's a $30 million opportunity, but that's something that we showcase in the roadmap and also verbalize in the conversation.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so there's three main documents. Do you
Mhm.
present the wins first before this exact one pager?
It's a good question. Depends on how much time we have. If it's 30 minutes, we just go straight to the point to be like, okay, we have 30 minutes with the exec team. We just want to show what we need. And then the wins becomes an appendix. If it's a 1 hour meeting, we like to use that as almost an opening act to build momentum. And then, hey, here's where we want to go from that last quarter's win.
Okay, got it. And then I just have to ask because, like, coming from Amazon, it's all about reading quietly and then discussing. Do you
Right.
present this on a PowerPoint usually, or is it just printed out for everyone, silently read, and then you discuss?
So we in the company that this like was piloted and leveraged, I would send this over as a pre-read about 48 hours before, so people had a chance to read it. And then just so it doesn't become an eye chart, I usually do just vision and objectives in one slide. And then one almost, I know this is a one pager, but we expand this into a PowerPoint that says like each goal then has one slide itself. So, and then some visuals, some ways to kind of space it out a bit.
Okay, got it, got it. There's a good comment by Anand. He says, "Work to be paused is a great column. Does it have to be derived on resources?"
Can you explain that a little bit when you say derived on resources?
Yeah, it's more like I was trying to understand when we talk about work to be passed, right? That's more like some of the projects that we may want to pass. Like, how do we derive that? Is it more like just on the resources? Like, do we need to deprioritize to get the resources in place for us to start this? Or is it more like this actually is alignment? Like, this one has to be stopped for us to start this initiative or something like that,
Mhm. Got
right?
it. I get what you're saying. I would say it typically is resource based. So let's say for this example, we're trying to push through new digital product capabilities to improve size and fit, and say that the team was also planning to launch a new brand marketing campaign not tied to a new product launch. Then it becomes like, okay, how do we want to resource the team? If we think that new digital product capabilities are more meaningful from a revenue or profitability standpoint, let's then deprioritize the marketing and cross-functional project because we won't have resources to support it. And this also has more revenue potential than something else. So it's kind of a trade-off of both level of effort and revenue impact becomes the decision-making criteria to deprioritize. But great question.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Has this slide evolved in any way? Was there like a V1 that didn't include certain things, but then you added because of certain feedback?
Yes. So in certain organizations, it's so designed based on the culture But in the culture of this particular organization, numbers weren't really a big thing. It was a lot about brand. It was about big, shiny objects and pictures. So the first iteration of this almost was showcasing what is the big, shiny statement. So it was just the vision and objectives. It was almost a pre-one pager before the one pager to just get people excited about the idea with a ton of great video, with a ton of great photos. And then it became a more substantial one pager that actually had the plan and the tactics that laddered up to it.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So you have to sell in the vision first, and then
Yep.
you go into your objectives and goals. Okay, interesting. Is there, let me ask you this.
Yes.
Knowing what you know now, is there anything you would add or remove from this slide?
That's a great question. I think I would keep it as is, but you know how I mentioned that there's the momentum building is really important. I would find a way, even in a 30-minute meeting, to insert a little bit of like even just a splashy stat of what we did in Q4, one learning, one opportunity or loss, so to speak, to just build up into this. So I think setting more context into this is really important, even if it's a 30-minute meeting. So I think I would almost embed that to be a part of the one pager.
I like that. I like showcasing the wins or losses as a very clear learning to set the table. Because especially when it comes to executives, sometimes they get busy and they forget what happened. So, and this page builds on what you've done in the past. So that's a good segue. Is there any space in these meetings where you address FAQs beforehand? It's something that's popular at Amazon, so I'm always curious.
I wish there was, but it tends to be just like a real-time Shark Tank vibes of like, hey, I've got a question for you. Can you kind of defend your thesis sort of thing? So I wish there was a little bit of an FAQ, but it tends to be ad hoc questions in the moment. But I
Okay.
always tell myself, it's like, hey, if our team built this, we know this better than anyone else. And a lot of the executives in the room are so removed from this. So just trusting the team's ability to be able to field any questions because they're truly the experts.
Got it. Do you, before the meeting, do you assign who on your team's gonna answer what type of questions? So it's clear before, rather than in the moment of the meeting?
At a high level, yes.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if there's a product management question, if there's a finance question that goes to our strategy planner. So, I think most people will know their roles, like largely, but usually what I'll do is I'll say, like, hey, as the team lead, I'm going to punt to this person. So they just know I'll probably just call on them and just allocate based on who I think is going to be best suited to answer that.
That makes sense. I guess so. To wrap up the one pager, what I like about this is this format. Yes, we see it in a, let's call it PowerPoint slide right now, but it's very adaptable to any format, whether that's a Google Doc or a Word doc, etc. But it's more about addressing this content up front in a very clear and succinct way. So this makes a lot of sense. Okay, so there's, we covered what happens in the meeting with this one pager. I'm also curious, any tactics you have to get executive buy-in before the big meeting? Is there anything you do to prep them or anything like that?
Yeah. So what I mentioned was like, hey, after talking, I feel like we should include the momentum building in the executive meeting. But if you have the opportunity before this executive meeting, it's all about building your brand as a team, as a division before that. And that tends to be showcasing really clear data points from the last quarter, the last month, the last big initiative that you launched. So the what is kind of like, what tests have you recently run? What campaigns, what new product launches? And then be super crisp on the metrics that you were able to move. So for instance, hey, we launched a Black Friday, Cyber Monday campaign, but this Black Friday, Cyber Monday was X% more profitable. And then that ties back into profit margin being a big goal. I think that's a great segue. So I think showcasing that before the meeting is really important. And then I would say the other prep before the meeting too is in this whole branding and advocating ethos. Know the other individuals that have the ear of the key executives of the meeting. So if you can get FaceTime with them, if you can showcase your wins, whether that's in a weekly report that gets shared out to executives or an MBR, finding those ongoing meetings where you can almost have FaceTime and showcase those wins are really important in building that presence and that relationship. So they can at least tie in a face, a brand, a name before that big meeting.
That makes a lot of sense. What about, let's say you're scheduled for a meeting a month or a month and a half out with a executive that you barely know, either because that executive is new or you just haven't worked with that person. How do you build that credibility and trust with them? Anything else besides sharing all this information beforehand or MBRs, et cetera?
Yeah. So I'd say there's two facets to it. There's the direct relationship building and then the indirect relationship building. I would say the direct is almost like when and where can you get FaceTime with this executive? So as I mentioned, ongoing meetings are the easiest way because you know they'll be there, whether that's weekly, monthly, quarterly, that tends to be the business reviews. So they can actually have a great affinity with you, your face, and positive results. I would say the other one is a bespoke business meeting. So if your executive in your division has a really good relationship with, say, another VP, being a part of those meetings and knowing what value you're adding, but trying to figure out a way to get into those meetings and showcase the work that you're doing. And then the other kind of like, it's still a direct, it goes in that direct bucket. But if you're able to get one-on-one mentorship in some larger companies, I don't know, Jason, if this was true at Amazon too, but there's mentorship opportunities where you get paired with an executive. Those executives likely know a lot of other executives, or you might even get paired with executive you want to learn the most from. So join those affinity groups where you can, or even like true just community groups. So cyclists from this company, maybe that executive is a part of it too, or an LGBT group. There's a lot of different organizations where you can just get more organic face time. And then the indirect bucket is almost like who do you know is in their trusted circle? And I think that goes from just kind of noticing who they engage with, seeing who they have lunch with, just seeing who they have water cooler chat with, and seeing who might know those individuals, or do you have a direct connection with them too? I think that positive affinity can just help build your brand more indirectly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Plus one of what you said. And yeah, if your company does have official affinity groups or mentorship programs, take advantage of those. Diana, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, yes. So, how do you prepare for an executive meeting going into it knowing that they have competing priorities and may not necessarily agree on the approach?
Yeah, so if I were to repeat your question too, it's almost like, let's say an executive is prioritizing A through C and you are priority D. How do you go in and hopefully get your priority D to one of the top three priorities that they'll push for next quarter? Is that a hypothetical?
That and knowing that there may be executive leaders in this meeting who differ in approach.
Mm.
So, how do you get buy-in with executives who may come from different viewpoints or priorities?
Mm. So I think anytime there's a, I don't want to say discrepancy, but a difference in priorities, it goes back to, okay, what are the big goals that your organization has and your team? And if your priorities or your goals are still anchored around the top three or top five business goals, so say profitability, maybe it's LTV or maybe it's a certain revenue growth, you can always go back to that universal language to say, hey, you know what? We are supporting one of your top three executive priorities. And with that, you're able to create a shared language, even if your strategy is different. And if you're able to, in the one pager showcase, here's my thought process. I've laid out how it works. Most other teams won't go through the homework of thinking about how it works. What are the risk and dependencies? What enablers I need? The executives will more likely support you as a team lead if they can see that you've done the homework, both the pros, cons, and you have some key wins under your belt. So I think showcasing and creating that universal language is really important. Showcasing the momentum building of maybe prior wins or losses in the past. I think being really honest is also critical. And then showcasing what your plan and roadmap really looks like to success can help. And then the other big kicker too, because I've definitely had those meetings, is showcasing that your initiative is really in the spirit of testing and learning. I think this notion of de-risking the strategy, if it's new or unfamiliar to them, really helps get them on board to be like, oh, okay, this is a test. And we can all hold hands to say if it does not work or if it falls under this metric, we can pause or do something else. That makes it more of a temporary assessment versus a long-term investment. And that tends to get more executives on board too.
Thank you.
To add to that, I do like tying it back to what is the overarching larger goal that your team and their team can align on. And then I think if you're going into a meeting where you anticipate some level of tension or conflict, that's where the pre-meeting work really matters. And
Mhm.
as Jamie said earlier, specifically what's powerful is aligning with their trusted circle of people or allies, etc., that you know will be in the meeting. Because if that person is more likely to support your proposal or strategy, it's less of a blow to it. It softens it. So that's where the pre-big meeting work comes in. Good points on that. Okay, so this is tied to it. Let's say you're in one of these executive meetings, large, let's say 15 plus, 20 plus people meetings, and there's an intense discussion going on between the executives. Big debate, hotly debated. And you're sitting there and you have the data and you have a strong opinion that you want to share. A lot of people find themselves in this situation, but they don't speak up. And then after the meeting, they're like, darn it, I should have said something. What's a good approach to chime in a situation like that? It's not easy.
Mm. It really isn't easy. And I wish I had a fun answer to this, but I'd say just chime in. I know it's not easy, but if you have the data, and specifically if you have the quantitative and qualitative data, so for instance, you have the numbers and you also have a consumer point of view. I think a lot of executives like to say, hey, I want to understand the end consumer's perspective. If you've got both, just chime in. So let's say it's a hot debate and it's a little awkward because like, oh, it's two C-suite members and say you're a senior manager. It's like, how do I jump in? I think just saying like, hey, I have an insight to add to this discussion. I learned that pull data point A, qualitative, pull data point B. These are some things that I found through some of my consumer research and what I've been working on. I believe that this is additive to X, Y, and Z. And so kind of use that to facilitate the conversation and keep things moving, but just showcasing those data points because sitting in a VP chair, I'm like, I really appreciate someone else speaking up. And as a VP, I try to say like, hey, does anyone else have a point of view? But sometimes it gets so hotly debated, there's never time to open up the discussion floor. But I would say as a VP, I do appreciate people who are willing to just chime in and speak up because sometimes we just kind of forget to ask the room's opinion.
I like that point. And do some people ask, do I need to raise my hand? In my opinion, it's no. You just speak up and state your point
Yes.
briefly. So what's your stance on it? Just jump
state
in.
your point briefly.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think to your ad, Jason, is like, don't go on this, 5-minute rant. I think if executives are in a hotly debated topic, just saying, I have data point A and data point B, and my recommendation is C.
Yes.
I know that
I
feels
agree.
a little bold in a big meeting, but I think just being really straightforward and getting to the point is actually appreciated by execs.
I agree. You don't need to show how smart you are by going on a 5-minute rant. Keep it. Ethan likes to say, be bright, be quick, be gone.
I
So
love
keep
that.
it short. And I think in this situation, yes, leading with the data. I liked your point about specifically leading with something like, I have a customer anecdote or data point that I think is additive to this, and then just stating.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. That's a good one because it's fascinating. A lot of people are in this position and they just they let the opportunity go past. But to be
Right.
bold in this situation is to stand out. So I say,
Yes.
if you're in this situation, take advantage of it.
And jump in. And I would say to always jump in, even if you're in an executive meeting. Ideally, you have some insights before the meeting, but always making sure to say something at least once in a big meeting.
Oh, that's it. Okay, so I agree with that, but why do you say that?
So when I was a manager and a senior manager, it was rare to get a lot of face time with executives. And I talked about how do you get the homework done before these big meetings happen? And if you can plant seeds of, hey, people actually know who you are, or I found that comment really insightful, people will remember that. And so versus you just being kind of a wallflower in a meeting, if you have a ton of great insights, make sure to share it. And if you're well prepared for the meeting, you'll have at least one thing to say, if not more.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's much better to say something, and maybe it's not the most insightful or most additive, but there's some value versus just being a wallflower. Because number
Mhm.
one, you'll probably regret it, but number two, the executives will remember it. Because, like you said, Jamie, not everyone speaks up, especially in these large meetings. So if you're the
Mhm.
one to do it consistently, you do it 3, 4, 5 times, they'll start remembering. And then by the 6th meeting, they're going to expect that you speak up. They might even
Right.
call on you, right? Oh,
Yes.
Jamie, you always bring up good customer anecdotes. Do you have one on this topic? So
Right.
yeah, that's how you
Helps
do it.
establish your brand.
So that's one big call to action for everyone in this meeting or watching the recording is every meeting you have with an executive, have it to be a personal goal where you add something and say something to the meeting. I like that takeaway.
100%.
What about, okay, slight pivot. Let's say
Yes.
you're working with a partner team, stakeholder team on a big launch and you've shipped it, it was successful. And you got their executive acknowledgement. Their executive liked what you did and what your
hmm
team did. But that executive is in another org and you're not working with them as much. How do you maintain that relationship with that executive without being annoying, etc.?
Mm. So let's say I was on the product management side and I reported to the CDO's Chief Digital Officer, but I really liked working with the CMO and they're more adjacent. I would always go back to what is the CMO's goals for the rest of the year? What are their top three priorities? And how can you, as a product leader, empower or support those priorities? So in developing that relationship, instead of being like, hey, I'm here, pay attention to me, it's more like, hey, as a CMO, say the CMO really cares about improving LTV of customers. And as a product leader, you could say, oh, is there work that we're doing to improve personalization or retention marketing efforts through subscription? These thereby can help move the metric that is LTV, and that can help really fuel the CMO's goals. So that's a conversation to say, hey, CMO, we're working on some things to support customer LTV. I'd love to jam with you to talk about prioritization. And I think that can also help facilitate one-on-one meetings. You can discuss prioritization and have more true face time, and you'll be seen as a trusted thought partner. And I'm pretty sure that CMO is going to appreciate that someone in the product org is actually caring about the work that he or she is bringing to life as well. So really anchoring on like, what do you know their goals are and how can your team continue to support that and empower those goals to come to life?
That makes sense. When you were in your VP role at Vital Proteins or your GM role at Nike, how
Mhm.
did you like it when someone asked you for a meeting, either for you to be their potential mentor or they just want to get to know Jamie better, how did you like it when how that person came prepared? Like what did that person do to the meeting where you said, "Ah, that was a worthwhile high value meeting"?
Mm. So I would say at Vital Proteins, just kind of remembering some of my initial one-on-ones with more junior leaders, I appreciated it when they came with, hey, I actually know what your e-commerce goals are for the year. And even though I sit in retail, I have some ideas on how some of the things that we're doing in retail can support e-commerce growth as well. Do you want to have a conversation on what that might look like? So that actually became more of a brainstorming and jam session. And I appreciated how they did their homework and knew what we were trying to do and what metric we were trying to move ahead of time. So there was no more
Mm.
additional explanation, but I was like, oh, she came to party and she already knows what we're about and we're actually working together. And it's almost like the individuals coming with, how can I help you? More than how can I help them? And then by the end of the meeting, it became, hey, how can I help the retail team? After she had the conversation, it became almost an exchange of value where I almost wanted to help her as well because she came in to say, hey, some of the work that I'm doing is also supporting your team's goals.
Oh, interesting. I love that term, the exchange of value. And you bring up such a good point because most of these types of requests are, can I learn about your priority? Can you tell me
Mhm.
about your goals? But honestly, in a 15 or 30-minute one-on-one meeting with an exec, it's kind of a waste of time, right? Because most
Right,
of the time you can figure that out. Ask your
right.
manager, ask your skip, whatever. So take it a step further, come into the meeting with ideas based on that information already. Yeah,
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense. It's also a good point with cold outreach too. The worst is, hey, can you tell me what your goals are and see how I can help you? And when I get those, I think, first of all, I don't want to write out what my goals are. And second, I don't even know if you can help me. So I don't know if this is a waste of time. So
Exactly.
answer all of that up front. I like that a lot. Okay, this is an interesting question I've always had. When is it possible to get true executive buy-in and support for you and for your team if you don't work on important business lines?
Yes. And I know that sounds counterintuitive,
Yep.
but if you're able to position yourself well, you can still get buy-in. So I'll give an example of my time at Walmart, for instance. I was a part of the Walmart online grocery division. And as I mentioned, we were at beta. So we were thinking about how do we launch in market one? But a lot of the work that we were doing is, again, tying it back to what is Walmart's overall top three goals for the year? And how can this test division help become almost a testing ground for a lot of big initiatives. So, for instance, we were working with marketing to say, if you want to test a ton of new channels, we have almost experimental dollars to play with. So, if you want to test into Pinterest at the time was a big thing, or affiliate marketing, use our funds as a testing ground because we want to test along with you. Or, hey, product management team, if you want to test and learn, we were almost a sub website from Walmart.com. If there is a new feature set that you want to A/B test, we have the agility to test things that a larger division might not have. So we have the flexibility to fail, more agility, and typically a testing budget is those are the beautiful parts of being a smaller division or an experimental division is you have the flexibility that bigger, more high priority divisions don't. So use that to your advantage and showcase how you can be an experimental space for others to learn from. And I think that will actually get buy-in. And leaders tend to be like, oh, I want to test this fun new idea. Why don't I start partnering with this division? So you become almost an innovation or thought leader in the organizational space.
How about when you think of career growth? Because so
Mhm.
this is especially in this environment where companies are, a little bit more cost conscious, et cetera. When you think of career growth, how do you decide, do I stay with the big profitable line of business that's
Mhm.
core to the company, or do I take on a more risky endeavor within the same company, but like a basically startup team? How do you balance that or think about that?
Great question. I would say if you can note if the company's goals are really focused on profit, that might not be the time that you want to switch to an experimental division. If you are, make the most of it and showcase how it can drive profit. But when there's talks about profitability, that tends to be how do we get more cost efficient? And usually, when it's cost efficient, that's where resources for a smaller division might fade over time. So you're better suited for career growth if you're in one of the really big behemoth profit lines. If your company is more in the hyper growth revenue phase, sure, you can be in these big lines, but in terms of what you're learning, you're probably going to learn less than if you were in one of the smaller lines that can be one of the true accelerators for the company's next chapter of hypergrowth. So I would say really if company's in growth mode, you can go to any division you want, even experiment with a smaller division. But when it's in profit mode, I would try to stick to the big, profitable, secure areas of the business
That makes
because
sense.
that's what'll get invested.
One part that I find so fascinating about your experience is not only have you worked for some of the largest companies and well-known brands in the world, but you've also experienced hypergrowth with emerging brands. Is there something you think the big companies can learn from the more emerging, nimble brands? And then vice versa, what can the emerging brands learn from the big companies that you've experienced?
Yeah, great question. I would say for the emerging brands, what they can learn from big companies is the scalable process. So, for instance, if we talk about like forecasting process, it's not necessarily like, hey, let's throw spaghetti in the wall and see what sticks, but documentation, premortems and postmortems. I know it's a little bit of a drag and it takes a lot of work, but that makes it so much easier to scale. Say you're running another promotion next quarter versus starting from scratch. And I found that in emerging brands, we're doing a lot of legwork again to rebuild something from scratch. That if we were just to document it and even using AI tools to do it or summarization tools, that's going to help a lot in terms of building. And then I'd say another thing that emerging brands can learn from large brands is really having clear goals for the year and sticking to it. It can just be macro hero goals. Maybe it's just profitability, maybe it's revenue. But I think with smaller brands, it's so easy to be like every month we're flipping to something else. And you start to lose focus on the bigger kind of KPI and metric to move. So I think anchoring around that. And then on the flip side, for larger organizations, I would say being more nimble and open to testing because testing, experimenting, and the ability to move fast is what allows these smaller brands to grow quickly. And I think with larger brands, they can plateau or get stuck. So I think having more of an open mindset and a little bit of willingness to change. So just because you have annual goals doesn't mean you can't revise them at the end of every quarter. So I think each size can learn something from one another, but I think the big brands can learn about how to be quicker with decision making, just like a smaller brand does.
That makes sense. Is there one that you felt more energized with personally? Do you like the big company? Do you like the
Mm.
more nimble? I mean, do you like both?
So I would say in the larger companies that I worked for, I tended to be a part of these emerging
Mm,
divisions within the large organizations. And that's actually what led me to working for emerging brands. So I would say working for something that's in the hyper growth stage has really been my sweet spot. So whether that's an emerging division in a large brand or that of a emerging brand or even a startup, I'd say anything where you can see impact right away is right up my alley.
got it. That makes sense. I have one more question, but before I get to it, I want everyone on the recording to know. So if you want to learn more about different growth levers and operational plans to build a digital business, check out Jamie's Maven course. I copy and pasted the link in the chat. The next one is September 28th, 29th. So it's a jam-packed 2-day weekend where you'll learn how to build, get buy-in, and execute a plan for e-commerce on the e-commerce 201 level. And then if you want 10% off for attendees, it's early bird 10 September or SEP, SEPT, early bird 10 SEP. So check that course out. Okay, so Jamie, one part about your one piece of your experience that's really fascinating is Vital Protein to Nestle acquisition.
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite memory about that time period?
I would say really being able to see the transformation from hyper growth in terms of revenue growth to one of profitable growth within a year. I think
Mm,
that the quickness of that pivot is something I just haven't experienced in other brands. And to see that with a team of 20 on the e-commerce side, we could actually make that a reality. That was a lot of fun. And I think it just built a lot of our confidence to say, like, hey, we are empowered and we have the tools to make changes quickly. So I think that that was really fun and to see, hey, this actually helped achieve this organization's goals of acquisition to integration and knowing that we were able to do it in just under a year was great.
that timeline is incredibly impressive. Was there something that it's probably a lot of things, but is there a
Mhm.
silver bullet attribution from that turn to hyper growth to profitable growth that you count on,
Yeah,
or
I would say fundamentally, when you're in hyper growth mode, one thing that gets neglected is really looking at the costs and the OpEx to the business. So I'd say actually just going through an audit and saying, hey, we have a lot of tools that are duplicative, or, this tool can actually be leveraged through D2C, Amazon, and Walmart.com. So I think looking at the operational expenses was one big shift to be like, we actually don't need 20% of this and can still run as a business. And then also from a marketing dollars perspective, when you're in hypergrowth, you're really looking to see how do we move the needle from a revenue standpoint. But you start to realize when you start to add metrics like POAS instead of just ROAS for marketing, so profit on ad spend or first order profit, shifting the KPIs to be more profit oriented, we started to see, hey, we're spending a lot of money against items that are negative profit or are actually really relevant for, the second time purchase or third time. So we should not use that as a hero for new customer acquisition. So going through an audit, adding new KPIs that start to measure profit was really critical. And then the third component is how do we retain users? So I think there's a lot of
Mm,
focus on hypergrowth to be like, let's just acquire. And that's still super important. But we were then focused on more long-term brand building and also CRM and subscription initiatives for more scalable and sustainable growth.
that makes a lot of it makes logical sense, but it's not easy to do. When you had to make that pivot or shift, did you, as the leader, need to hire new talent, or were you able to transition your existing team to, we're going to pivot, we may need to learn new skills, etc.?
We had to hire new talent, but luckily we
Mm,
had a little bit of budget to say like, hey, instead of hiring a backfill for someone who had departed, why don't we actually use this to invest on more scalable, profitable areas of the business, i.e. retention or subscribe and save, or maybe in product
ah,
management to drive personalization at scale.
okay. I think, who was it? Was it Molly Graham? I think she just wrote on LinkedIn. There's a big difference between a company who's valued at 1 billion and a company who's driving 1 billion in revenue. And I think
I
she was proposing we need to call one a unicorn and another one a rhinoceros because
I love that.
rhinoceroses are real. So,
That's so true.
okay, so I know we're at time, but let me just one final question. So
Yes.
because you've run multiple cohorts on Maven, you have a 4.9 rating, which is great. Is there a favorite testimonial or student interaction or alumni success story, something from your Maven course that you fondly remember?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say one of them was one individual came in and she said that she actually left her business to then start a new product and e-commerce business based on the course. So I think the confidence of what she was able to learn in these 6 modules was able to equip her for success. And she said, and she compared it to, hey, like going to university and grad school, I feel like I got 6 modules worth of knowledge that I could have gotten in a semester's worth at a university. I was like, that's really cool to see the condensed impact it could make to even change someone's career trajectory.
Wow, that I don't think you could get a better testimonial than that. So you might need to have that person do like a video and snippet so you
Right.
can put it everywhere.
Exactly. That's a great call out, Jason.
Well, great chatting with you, Jamie. And everyone, check out Jamie's course on Maven and also connect with Jamie on LinkedIn because you'll learn a lot, especially about digital businesses and e-commerce.